Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This is Dr. Sally Good, and we are having a podcast today called Goodbody, Goodbrain. And one of the things we love to do is find unique, incredible people all over the world who are actually creating an impact in the world. Not only their practice, but what they do with their families and a day-to-day life. And today we have such a person. We have Todd Payne with us. He is the founder of Connect Fully, or maybe Connect Fully, whichever way you want to look at it. So, Todd, I'm going to turn this music down just a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And the questions are going to be about, where the heck are you listening? Where are you now? What part of the world are you in?
Let me begin by saying thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. We are connecting today. I am in Porto, Portugal, which is the second city in Portugal. And my family and I live here. We moved here to Portugal following a house fire when we lost our home and all of our possessions in Colorado about 3.5 years ago, and decided to use that as an opportunity to explore the world and see if we couldn't try something new. So a lifetime in the United States, and now we are citizens of the world.
Oh, and it was a matter of timing. Sorry about your house. Remind me the name of that town.
Louisville, Colorado, between Denver and Boulder. And there was a fire. It was a wildfire. About 1,000 homes were lost during that fire back in December of 21.
Oh, and that the tragedy of that, of having to rebuild and whatever. And it's I think I mentioned to you, I used to live in Lahaina, Hawaii, that completely burned down last year, which seems like a lifetime ago. But then you're dealing with the aftermath of that. So good for you that you had the foresight and the adventuresomeness to take off and go and do. Tell me.
It's part.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say it's part of how my wife and I see the world. That there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be the unforeseen, and to try to grab a hold of it and say, we have to force things to be back the way that they used to be. We're going to make it. We're going to go back in time, and that's just not how we've discovered life to be. So we asked ourselves, hey, what is this an opportunity to do? And that's really ultimately how we ended up, going on an adventure, as you say.
And I'm very curious about your work with emotional intelligence. Can you tell me how you started out creating this company, Connect Fully, and basically what services do you do?
Yeah, thank you. I was an ordained minister for 20 years in the Lutheran Church. But it was a very hard thing for me because I had no people skills as a young man. In fact, when I told my parents that I was going to be a minister, my father said, "You can't be a minister, you're terrible with people." And part of my training for ministry was a year-long internship, at the end of which my supervisor wrote on my evaluation form, "Todd has none of the gifts and skills for ministry." I was so bad with people, I didn't even know I was bad with people. But 20 years in the ministry, it's like life in a rock tumbler. And I learned about myself. I learned about others. I learned about couples. I learned about teams. And ultimately, I was able to get a sabbatical. And on my sabbatical, I discovered a tool called the Enneagram, which is a system of personality. And when I discovered the Enneagram, all these lessons that I had been learning about how people functioned and how they interacted and how those interactions could be better, there was a framework and a system. And so I began to use the Enneagram in my congregation with my parishioners, with my staff, with my volunteers, and really discovered that it was a valuable tool. And then I decided one day that I was kind of done with evenings and weekends, and I was ready. I'd paid my dues. I was ready for something different from life. And that was when I said, this gift of emotional intelligence is something I think everyone could benefit from. And so I have a lot of clients that are couples. I have a lot of clients that are trying to have a relationship with their grown children. Anybody who is really struggling to understand the people in their lives, have communication with them, to be empathetic with them. The Enneagram really gives us those skills. And so that's the tool that I use. I like to say the Enneagram is the vehicle and emotional
Mhm.
intelligence is the road that we drive down in that vehicle. So that's the work that I do
Mhm.
with people, is to help them understand themselves better, understand other people better, and then use that to improve their relationships and their lives.
So, where do you think the very genesis of all this starts? Where does it start?
Well, there are four pillars to emotional intelligence, and the first pillar is self-awareness. If we don't understand our own patterns, our own triggers, our feelings and thoughts, and the way that we interpret the world around us, and the way that we respond to the world around us, then we
Mhm.
really end up being caught in many of the same patterns over and over again. So
Mhm.
self-awareness is the first pillar, and it's the one that I work with people to understand their Enneagram type, and not only to understand the shadow side, but also to understand the possibilities, because the Enneagram gives us a way to grow. And that's that
Mhm.
second pillar of emotional intelligence. It's the self-management. Now that I know a little bit about myself and what
Mhm.
triggers me, and what gives me joy, now I can make informed choices. I'm not bound to do the things I've done in the past, but I can actually move in a direction that I want to move in. The third pillar of emotional intelligence is awareness of others. And the Enneagram gives us
Mhm.
great insight into other people. In fact, my marriage improved wildly when I discovered the Enneagram, and all of a sudden was like, that's why my wife does the things that she does. That's why she sees the world the way
Mhm.
she sees the world. And there's a natural empathy that is born when other people's actions don't seem so arbitrary or even maybe vindictive, but instead there's a real internal logic to them, and we can understand where people are coming from and why they are the way they are. That leads to the fourth pillar of emotional intelligence, which is relationship management. So if you kind of picture a box, there's self-awareness, self-management, other awareness, and I wish it could be other management, right? But we can't manage other people. What we can do is manage our interactions with them. So it really,
Mhm.
it all begins with self-awareness, to your question. But from that self-awareness, these other gifts grow and offer us the opportunity to improve ourselves and the relationships that we're in.
Well, I think it's a wonderful foundational vehicle for all this work that you're doing. Um, there are many other things we use in business, and it's not the person; it's a personality. And as soon as we learn how to speak their language, and we don't all speak the same language, even though sometimes it's English, sometimes it comes from totally different places. Some of us are
Yeah.
like nurturers and knowledge seekers, and some of us are
Yep.
action takers, and some of us absolutely have to have a blueprint before we can make any move whatsoever. And when you try to push those people into moving faster, they get frustrated and sometimes angry and they just walk out.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I like to borrow an illustration from communication theory, and I talk about sender distortion and receiver distortion. That
Mhm.
when we speak, we know what we mean. But if I
Mhm.
were to use the word bus, for example, well, what did you picture? A school bus, a Greyhound, a shuttle that takes you to the terminal at the airport? There's lots of different kinds of buses in the world. And just because I know which kind of bus I'm referring to doesn't mean that you do. But when we have this insight into one another, into ourselves, we can compensate for that sender distortion or that receiver distortion. I can speak to my wife in ways that I know she'll hear me, because she is a compassionate, nurturing, loving person. And so feeling is really the language that I need to use to connect with her. And that was one of the reasons that things really turned around for us. I said, oh, it's not so hard for me to speak in ways that she understands now that I know what that is.
Yes, and I think you've hit upon a really important thing in relationships, particularly in the marriage relationship. Learning that language over time and being able to apply it deepens the relationship so much. So, could
Yeah.
you tell our audience what are some of the first things that you start to do to sort of like tap into that ability?
That's a really great question. And I offer a 16-week program that I bring my couples into, and really the beginning of the program is about understanding this Enneagram system so that we have common language. I had a student many years ago who had a career in psychiatry, and when I taught him the Enneagram, he said, "Gee, I wish they had given us this in medical school," because all of his relationships with his patients were what we call I-thou relationships. There's me and there's you. But what the Enneagram affords us the opportunity to do is there's sort of a neutral third ground, a sort of a neutral space. So my wife, who happens to be a type 2, instead of saying, "You did this," or "I don't like it when you do that," I can move into this, well, Stacy, that's my wife, you're a type 2, and sometimes type 2s do this, and is this something I see happening with you? Help me understand what's going on. And now we're all of a sudden we're talking about type 2s. We're talking about the personality. She can connect to that as much as she feels, or she can tell me maybe I'm reading it wrong. But it's no longer this sort of head to head. But instead we have this common language, this common space. And so that's the work I do with couples in the beginning of the program, is to give them common language, to give them insight into themselves and into their partner, so that when we really dig into the issues that they're struggling with, there's no animosity, there's no fighting. There's only this cooperative understanding that we're moving forward and working together just against a problem, and not against one another.
Oh, and if we could teach the world this, just think what would happen.
Wouldn't that be
And, and,
wonderful?
and I'm hoping that somebody somewhere is starting in grammar school, um, they're all different kinds of frameworks, but just teach something that kids can hang their hat on. So it's not like you're saying, oh, you, but it's more like, oh, I understand. Okay, when I do this, this happens, and etc. Because
Hmm.
you're not pointing the finger at each other.
Well, none of us exist in a vacuum, right? I'm also a student of systems theory, and when we
Mhm,
begin to understand the ways that we influence one another, and the causes and effects, and the intricacies of the systems that we live in, because we have
mhm,
patterns of our own behavior, but as couples and
mhm,
relationships, we have patterns that we fall into. I'm sure you've seen that in your own relationships, and when we have the opportunity, as you say, from an early age. I know with my children, I feel like they did a better job in elementary school than was done for me in my own grade school
mhm,
years. And that's really sort of the gap I reach out to offer people is, hey, some people are natural people. I am not. And the example I love to give is, if you're failing math class, don't go to the kid who aced the course without doing homework for tutoring. Go to the kid who failed last year and is passing this year, because he's the one who can really explain to you how the problems are done and how to get to the desired solution. And that's sort of the place I was in. I was so bad with people that now I have the
mhm.
opportunity to say, listen, it's a learnable skill, and I can save people like the heartache, the 20 years of heartache that I went through, and instead give you tools you can use right away to begin feeling closer, more connected, and more productive in your relationship.
Well, as you know, and you mentioned, I do different kinds of counseling, and
Hmm.
that's really like my hobby job. I love doing that. I just love it because I get to talk to soldiers in El Paso, jet fighter pilots, CEOs, People
Hmm.
who pick the wrong partner, etc. It's a whole big giant arena of different human emotions.
Yeah.
And when we start working on, like, what is it that you think you heard from the person, and they explain it, and it's not what the person said at all, and they don't
Right.
have any tools right there to do this thing with. And
Hmm.
having the tool is just an amazing thing. And just look at all the turmoil and trials and things that are going on in the world right now. If we only had mechanisms to speak to each other on this kind of level. And
Right.
I find that emotional intelligence is gaining more acceptance, but
Hmm.
honestly, there's lots of guys who don't really understand it at all. Could you just give us a little tiny brief overview of, like,
Sure.
what's the idea of emotional intelligence?
Well, I think we all graduate childhood with the belief that other people are like us, and they want what we want, and they value what we value, and they reason the way we reason. But in truth, people are wildly different. Our experiences, our generation, our culture, and what emotional intelligence equips us to do is to create a space in ourselves that allows for there to be other ways of being human in the world. In fact,
Hmm.
when we moved here to Portugal, it was really eye-opening, just to discover how differently businesses are run, or governments are run, or dinner parties are run. Like, people
Yes.
are different here, and it's a wonderful thing to discover. And emotional intelligence not only opens our eyes to the ways that other people do things, but it does it in a way that's gentle with us. It's okay for
Hmm.
me to be me and you to be you. One isn't
Hmm.
right and one isn't wrong.
Hmm.
But can we, in appreciating and celebrating one another, find ways to be vulnerable? There's no way we're going to solve our problems if I can't share you with you my needs, and if I can't
Hmm.
respect the needs that you're bringing, and ways for us to work together. So I think emotional intelligence is really recognizing that the only thing in life that really matters is the people in our lives and relationships. Without being too morose, as a minister, you might imagine I walked the end of life journey with many, many people,
Many.
and while
Right.
it seems a little bit, cliche, it's true that to a one they say love is what matters, family is what matters, the people in your life is what matters, not all of these other things
Hmm.
that we can get so wrapped up in. So emotional
Hmm.
intelligence is about focusing on what matters and giving us the skills to handle those things effectively and with purpose.
Yes. My mom used to say, "There's more than one way to skin a cat," and I
Oh,
used to
we hate
cringe.
that expression in our family. So we say there's
Yes.
more than one way to pet a dog.
Yes, and whenever she would say that, I would go like, "Oh, mom, why are you saying that?" And then later I understood what she really, really, really meant about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not
Well,
your
your mom's
way and my
exactly right,
way.
but your
Yeah,
mom is
my
exactly
way and
right.
your way. Yeah, yeah.
But
And the other thing I wanted to bring up is, I don't know if you follow some of the CEOs of the big companies.
mm,
There's a gentleman by the name of, I want to say, Ma Gadet. I'm really butchering it, but he was the head, or still is the head, of Google, and
mm,
especially the AI section. And he says there's only three things moving into the future that we really, really need to know. One is what is artificial intelligence and how it impacts us. Number two, to recognize when it's hallucinating and it's not telling us the truth. And third, always have a human connection, always
yeah,
have authenticity in your
yeah,
relationships, because
yeah,
we're going to be so teched in the next couple of years. It's coming into my arena. I am embracing it and learning about it and using it for very useful things to
sure.
do. And in every arena, it will appear as like sort of like a second assistant, like, or
Hmm.
to give me ideas to bounce off of, ideas that I
Hmm.
may not have thought about just thinking myself. So yes, authenticity, that human connection, is going to be, I think, a big theme coming in the next, oh, certainly in the next decade.
Yes, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but I find that with the advancement in technology, in many ways, it isolates us even more. I have lots of couples who will come to me, and their idea of date night is playing on their phones next to one another on the couch, where
Ah,
they're not even they're not even really looking at each other and talking to one another. And in some ways, it's a lost art form like cursive or letter writing, to
mhm,
just sit and have a conversation, to share genuinely from ourselves with another
mhm,
person, to connect and see what's going on with them. So I think technology is, I'm exceptionally thankful for it. I couldn't be living the life I'm living without it. But in the
mhm,
same breath, we really have to be intentional about learning these skills of emotional intelligence, because technology is just a tool for the people in our lives, for ourselves and for those that
mhm.
we love.
Well, you've hit on one of my soapboxes here.
Oh,
Um,
tell me, what's that?
the soapbox is, when I go out to dinner and there's a, a mama and a daddy and two kids. Mom and daddy are on their phones. The kids are on their tablets watching whatever, just so they're appeased. And there is totally no conversation going on. Um, if that's the world that we're going to produce and espouse for the next 10 years, I don't know what's going to happen in terms of human relationships. So
Yeah.
for people that I work with who are having a lot of communication problems with their spouse,
Hmm.
I ask them about the quality of that. When you say you are in the same space with each other and things aren't happening, what are each of you doing? And of
Right.
course, it's they're either watching TV, they're on their tablet, or they're on their phone.
Yep.
And the
Yeah, it's
idea
true.
of putting it down is so scary because
Yes,
it's
it
become
is.
their anchor.
It's almost a shield or a protector of some kind of defense.
Hmm.
Because being human is hard. Being in relationships is hard. I mean,
Hmm.
I love the work that I do, but I never want to mislead anyone that I work with that it's going to be simple. Because
Hmm.
to get in touch with your own needs, your own feelings, your own fears is scary business. And to hold a space open for your partner's needs or fears is very challenging to do. But I also try to tell people that it is the most worthwhile work you'll ever do. It's
Yes.
so enriching when you make a heart-to-heart connection with your partner. And
Hmm.
they wouldn't be your partner if you hadn't made that connection at some point. So for a
Hmm.
lot of us, it's really more about rediscovering and
Hmm.
reinvigorating that connection. And um, we fall into ruts over the years in our relationships. It's an effective tool for getting things done, parenting, careers, life. But
Hmm.
our relationships deserve the time and the effort, as well, as our work does, or as our children do, because that's ultimately where we'll find our meaning, our satisfaction, and our joy.
I tell people that being in relationship, particularly a marriage relationship, is a crucible of
Yeah.
therapy. That everything, every bad thing, every good thing, every horrible thing, everything a person can do to another person, the potential is there, both good and bad.
Yes.
And so whenever your buttons get pushed, I call them land mines up here, because
I like.
sometimes we have them and we don't realize it. And somebody will
Yeah.
say something and the reactivity will be huge. And then that's when I want to know, where did that come from? And sometimes when it's in infant and toddler, there's no language, there's just a feeling.
Right.
But if you start to like unpeel that onion and you sort of get down to the core, you can get the root of what that reactivity is and put it in context.
That's beautifully put. And in many ways, I think we never really grow up. I mean, we gain additional
No.
skills with language, with reason, with all of this. We are adults, obviously, we grow up, but ultimately, we are feeling beings, and we still have those triggers, those reactions. We're still 4 year olds in some ways, and when we take the time to do the work of emotional intelligence, and this is where the Enneagram is so valuable, we can discover why we react the way we do. And until we have that why, we don't
Mhm.
have the choice to do it a different way. But the beginning work I do with a lot of folks is to discover what are your triggers, so that when they arise, and it really, I don't know, Sally, is this your experience? It's in the body. Are you
Oh,
clenching your
yes.
jaw? Are
Mhm.
your palms
Mhm.
sweating? There's our bodies send us so much valuable information about what's going on inside of us, and so many of us are so disconnected from our bodies, right, with our phones in front of our faces. So
Mhm.
getting that vagal nerve connection and understanding what information our body is sending us about our feelings, about our needs and our triggers, that's foundational work in the self-awareness process.
Yes, and I use the vagus nerve exercises with it to help quell anxiety, to get more
Yeah.
into rest and digest out of fight and flight.
Yes.
And most people, when I say, "Do you know what your vagus nerve is?" they go, "Huh?
Huh?
Huh? You know about the parasympathetic nervous system or the sympathetic nervous system?" No. Have you ever tried to stop blinking your eyes? Oh, yeah, we used to do that as kids. Well, there you go. That's the vagus nerve at work.
I love that you use that. I do too. I think it's we forget that I think for many people, I know this is true for myself. In the world of the
Mhm.
Enneagram, I'm a head-centered person. I'm a type 5.
Mhm.
And so I can really live in my head, and
Mhm.
almost for most of my early life, sort of thought of my body as just a vehicle that my
Carried
self
your brain. You
drove
just carried
around
it.
in. Yeah, exactly. But
Yes.
it's not. I need to eat. I need to sleep. I need to exercise. I need to meditate. I need to treat my
Mhm.
body in a way that it then treats me well, so that I
Yeah.
can have the resources I need to perform.
Yes, and it switches over to becoming the temple of the spirit.
Yes. Yes. That's beautifully put.
And and when we can recognize that, because with the brain gut axis going on now, with neurotransmitters being made by our gut, with the gut
Right.
having genomic response, with the gut managing hormones, managing things that happen in our brain, the TPA axis, pituitary, thymus, adrenal glands going on in our head that is actually managed by our gut, we go, whoa, boy, God was really, he really knew a lot of stuff, didn't he? And guess what? Know we don't know the tiniest little thing about what we're capable of.
And in many ways, we are always a little bit behind the system. Right? Our bodies and our minds are responding, and
Mhm.
we have this illusion of control, but we're kind of along for the ride in many ways. I was shocked when I
Mhm.
learned that the vagus nerve has more neurons that fire in the direction of the brain, giving the brain information, than the other way
Mhm.
around. I'm thinking, oh, the brain controls the body. No, no, no. The
No,
body
well,
informs the brain. There's all of this
mhm.
transmission of valuable information, and the gut is what are they calling it now? The second brain,
The second brain,
gastropsychiatry.
and then
Yeah,
now they've found sound neural connections in your heart, and they're calling that your
that's right.
third brain.
That's right. And you know what? It's what's fascinating is the Enneagram, and now it's 2,500 years old.
Mhm.
It goes straight to the heart of what we've just been talking about, because the first lesson
Mhm.
of the Enneagram is that all human beings have three kinds of intelligence. We have a head intelligence, we have a heart intelligence, and we have a gut intelligence. And when we learn how those function inside of us, and how each of us is sort of a unique recipe of those,
Mhm.
it's absolutely enlightening to understand human beings in this multifaceted way, rather than sort of simple. We're not simple creatures.
No, no, we're infinitely and wondrously made. and
Yes.
and we can talk about things on the cellular level in our gut, like there's the heroes that are breaking down fiber for us, and there's some little guys over here having a party, and they get out of control every now and then. So we have to make sure that they're okay. If they're not going to leave the condominium in a mess, you know how when you have those overnight visitors, those kind of things. Yes, just having a framework to understand more about what your body's capable of. And I tell people, the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, is the longest nerve in your body. And
Hmm.
it's the wanderer. And it comes from the Latin word for vagus, which means vagrant or vagabond.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't know the etymology of that word. That's really fascinating. Yeah, it touches on all of the major components of what makes us us, right? It wanders through the head, it's the flavor, it's smell, it wanders through the heart, the lungs, it
Mhm.
goes into the gut system. I mean, it really
Mhm.
leaves almost nothing untouched.
Yes, and it reaches the end point, and it actually also controls climax in sex.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's
So it
fascinating.
goes all the way down to the bottom of the floor of your
Of
pelvis.
that the sacred or the sacral chakra as well.
Yes, it goes all the way down. And when we treat it well by having a really good gut, um, then it does really good things for us. So we're Todd, we're just you and I are like we think that other people know what we know, but hardly a tiny little sliver of people know what we know. And I have to remind myself when I'm talking to other people, I can't get too far ahead of them.
Yeah,
I have to like be with them and
right.
let them take those baby steps as they go, or else they'll get overwhelmed and they won't move forward. They'll get too scared.
That's an excellent point, Sally. And honestly, I use that same principle when we're learning about our partner. And we assume that our partner, my wife and I've been married almost 25 years, and I think, well, she knows how I feel about this, or she knows what I think, or I'm still a mystery to her. She's still a mystery to me.
Mhm,
And we both need to slow down and bring each other along in
mhm.
our respective processes in order to problem solve, in order to relate. Because we do make that assumption. I do as a coach about what people know, but
Mhm,
all of us
mhm.
do in our relationships that, uh, well, they know how I feel about this, or they know how I'm going to react to that. And
They
the truth
should
is, no,
know. They should know. And I
they
say,
should
what?
know, right?
Are they telepathic? Do they have some special skill you don't know about?
Well, my
Yes.
wife is
And you
brilliant, but not telepathic.
right, right. And you brought up another really interesting point. As humans, we have seasons. And
Hmm.
when we're 16, we think, oh, I cannot wait until I'm 18 or 21 so I can do anything I want. And then I'll say, you're still going to have to put your seatbelt on. You have to stop at stop signs. You got to pay bills. You have to pay
Yeah,
taxes. All
yeah,
those things happen. And as we go through our seasons, um, different aspects of ourselves appear,
for sure.
different qualities that we have, we start to use them in a different kind of way. Um,
Yes.
like right now, I'm helping women leaders and entrepreneurs who have a message, but for some reason, they haven't put all the pieces together to get that message to get way out, to go from having your light under a bushel to becoming the lighthouse.
Hmm.
And the message is needed so much for other people and their wisdom is just amazing. But it's sort of like they're still down in the forest
Yeah.
and they see all the trees and they know they need to talk to the trees, but they can't figure out how to get over to them. And that's
Right.
my job. And it's fascinating to see how they each think about that and think about what their message is and the clarity of it and how to get there from here. How do you get to Everest from here? Well,
Hmm.
you have a Sherpa. You have somebody who's gone before you, even if it's to the next base camp, it doesn't matter. They've gotten there.
Right.
And the Sherpa
Right.
puts out these long ropes along the path. So, and they say, stay in between these ropes. You can veer back and forth a little bit, but don't get too close over here. Because if you follow along the path, you'll get to the first base camp. And that's where we sit and reflect. We're going to use a different set of skills to get to the next base camp. And that's
Hmm.
how life is all about. The
I like
skills
to
you
quote.
had early, yeah, the
I,
skills you had early might not be the skills you have when you're in your 70s or use.
I like to quote Saint Benedict, who said, "The man
Mhm.
who is his own master is the disciple of a fool." All of
Yes.
us need guidance. All of us need
Mhm.
a helping hand. And I think one of the things we face, particularly in American culture, is
Mhm.
this rugged individualism. I have to figure it out myself. I have to do it on my own.
Mhm.
If I ask for help, that makes me weak somehow.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
really essential, especially in couples work, to understand that this isn't something that either of us can do on our own. We
Mhm.
need each other. And more than that, it's better together. It's better when you
Oh,
have somebody
yes.
who can help you and show you and spare you some of the heartache
Mhm.
that each of I wish I could data dump my life experience into my children so that they didn't have to suffer the things I've suffered. But
Mhm.
the best thing I can do is offer them the guidance and be there for them as they pick their way through and make mistakes. And that's what we do for one another in the coaching realm too.
Yeah, and being in community,
Mhm,
being in
absolutely.
with other, like, iron sharpens iron. If men are struggling, don't struggle by yourself.
No.
There's if you have an addiction problem, on many different kinds, there's someone around, there's a community you can be in that can help you get out of that. You can go talk to your pastor. You can reinvigorate your faith and your belief. All kind of things are available to you, but if you stay in your house on the internet all day long, it's not going to change.
No, fear is such a paralyzing feeling, and if I could just shout from the mountaintops that fear is not the end. The way that the limbic system works in the brain,
Mhm.
fear is among the most powerful things that we experience. But hope is actually more powerful, and when
Yes.
we're able to share with people what's possible, give them
Hmm.
examples of how it's been done before.
Hmm.
Hope can really get us out of our houses, get us out of our shells, and move us into
Hmm.
a place where fear no longer controls us.
Yes, and an encouragement from people outside of yourself to say,
Essential.
"Hey, I'll go with you. Hey, it's really, once you do it a couple of times, you'll find it's not such a big deal."
And
Even
you're not
like,
alone.
no, you're not alone, and no matter what happens, you're not going to lose an arm or a leg. That used to be my criteria to decide if I was going to do a new project, especially if it was a big, big, scary project, like, oh, big, they call them big, hairy goals, those kind of projects. And I'd say to myself, if I do this thing, will I lose an arm or a leg? And if the answer was no, I'd say, well, let's try it.
Then
Let's see if
let's
what
give it a
works.
try.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah, I
experiment.
love that.
Life is one
Yeah.
big experiment.
There is no failure, only feedback, right? We learn as we
Exactly.
go, and
Hmm.
ultimately, one of the beautiful things about being human is our capacity to learn.
Hmm.
If we don't take chances, if we don't try new things, then we won't. But really,
Hmm.
it's so much richer our experience and ultimately our skill set, and then
Hmm.
we build and build, as you say, the seasons of life. Um, we
Hmm.
have to fall. We have to make mistakes. It's painful to watch toddlers learn to walk, and you just want to run after them and catch them, but you have to let them knock their heads a couple of times because that's how they figure it out.
Yeah, I tell people, particularly ones who have kids, and I say to them, I want you to remember the first time you held your child in your arms. Did that child have to be able to do anything or know anything for you to love it?
Right. No.
It
No.
was it was its own self, its own essence that was perfect. And you are the same way. When you're born, you are the most perfect creature there is. And then through life's battles and whatever, we don't ever say to kids that in that age, like, what, what can you do? I mean, you can't even talk. You can't even go to the bathroom. What good are you? And as we get to be adults, we end up saying the same things to other people. Like if they don't know how to do something or they've done something badly and they don't even know, like, he who knows not, he knows not. He's a fool, shun him. So, so we do the same thing with people, but I always say you are not your job.
No.
You are not that entity that you think you are. You are human first.
Yes.
And when we can accept that and embrace it, all the other stuff kind of like just falls in place.
I use that same idea with the Enneagram, as valuable as it is to
Hmm.
have the patterns that make up our personality laid out before us, and
Hmm.
gives us that self-awareness. You
Hmm.
are not your type. Your type is
Right.
instinctual. Your type is reactive. Your type is what you
Hmm.
will do if you don't pay attention or make conscious decisions. But you have a
Hmm.
human brain. And so you have
Hmm.
the capacity to make all kinds of different decisions. And it's not a life sentence. You're not locked in. But it's, we have to gain that awareness first in order to break the locks
Yes.
and
Yes.
step out. Hmm.
Well, I would like for you to just in our closing, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how you can see people practice more empathy in their lives.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I wish that it was as easy as a couple of tips or pointers, like making
Hmm.
a cake or something. But in truth, the first thing that I want anybody who is interested in having more empathy to practice is self empathy. I think a lot of us really judge ourselves very harshly. We have high demands, and we beat ourselves up. And if we can't have a space for ourselves to fall, to learn, rather than calling it making mistakes, let's call it learning. If we don't have a space for that
Hmm.
in ourselves, how can we have that for other people? And then we've already touched on maybe one of the other most important ones, which is um, to set yourself up for success by caring for yourself in a way that gives you the internal resources to be empathetic. I love those old Snickers commercials. Do you remember? And the guys, he would be mean and shouting and horrible, and they'd say, "Oh, you need a Snickers," and then he'd eat a Snickers bar, and then all of a sudden he'd be happy. Yeah, when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're under tremendous stress, the capacity for empathy is diminished. So we really
Hmm.
have to set ourselves up to be empathetic. But once we've done those things, once we've learned how to have some empathy for ourselves, when we've
Hmm.
established some practices so that we have those inner resources, then really what it becomes is about imagining another gift of the human mind, imagining
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
kinds of things that other people are going through, what they're feeling, what they're
Hmm.
experiencing. It's okay if you would respond differently to the same situation or stimuli, but their response is perfectly legitimate too. They're a human being, and however they may feel, however they may react, there's some internal sense and some logic there. So when we can, as the adage goes, walk a mile in their shoes, we can say,
Hmm.
I can understand. I'd say this to my wife: I can understand why what I said upset you. Uh, it wouldn't have upset me if you had said it to me, but I can
Hmm.
appreciate that your feelings are now hurt. That goes so much farther than the first years of our marriage, when I would just say, well, if you don't agree with me, then you must not understand me. So I'm just going to keep explaining myself until we're on the same page. No, that's never going to happen. She's a different person, and that empathy is
Hmm.
or it arises from the capacity to, I think even the Greek word means to feel, right? Sympathy and empathy, that pathy that goes with that
Kathy,
is
pathos.
feeling.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's that heart intelligence we were talking about
Hmm.
earlier, and allowing it
Hmm.
in it's hard, but it's the key to really human connection. We connect with other people in our common suffering and our common failings much more than we do in our triumphs and successes. So we have to kind of tap into that and allow it to be as uncomfortable as it is. That's another skill I work with my clients on. Is called emotional resilience, which is
Hmm.
feeling negative feelings but not acting on them.
Right.
And that's a huge part of empathy, is allowing those negative feelings to be present, not shunning them away, not solving them, but at the
Hmm.
same time not letting them dictate what our choices are going to be in negative ways.
Yeah, you hit on when you were talking about being angry or whatever. I use halt as the mnemonic.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good one. Hmm.
when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired,
Hmm.
stop before you
Yep.
engage in any conversation with another human being. Get yourself together, whether it's feeding yourself or taking a step back, because you can create a lot of hurt when you're hurting.
Sure. And there is this magic moment that we have the opportunity to intervene before we act. And I'm a huge fan of another acronym. This one comes from Tara Brock, and she has one that's called RAIN, which is recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And it's like,
Love
just
it.
recognize that, hey, I'm hurting right now, and I'm going to allow that
Mhm,
to be. It's okay for me to be hurting. I'm going to investigate it. Where is it
mhm,
coming from? What is the need that I have? And then nurture, like treat myself.
mhm,
If I were loving this person across from me, how would I treat
mhm,
them? Let me treat myself that way too. And it gives us something to do rather than react or in negative ways that roots us in that experience that we're having. And that
mhm.
becomes then the fertile ground that empathy arises from when others are suffering.
Yes, I love that metaphor that we have to create the fertile ground. We have to have before love can light. We have to have the nest, um,
Yeah.
and making the nest is when we're doing all the work for ourselves. When we're doing our own inner interventions, and when we're looking at those mind landmines up there and we're trying to defuse them, when we can create a safety, a nest for love to light, that's when we tune into that particular part of the world. And suddenly, someone we have never seen before, but they might even be my next door neighbor, but we didn't see them before.
Right.
They can enter into your environment and might be just the right person at the right time.
And they go from being objects to being subjects. They go
Yes.
from being things in the world to people that are real and have feelings and stories. And ultimately that's where the most wonderful relationships in my life have come from, is pausing and giving the space for people to be who they are, and
Mhm.
a curiosity, discovering what their life experiences are and
Mhm.
what their perspectives are. It's really enriching, but only when they stop being a threat. Only when you stop seeing people as we're not competing against one another.
No.
There's no love is not a limited resource. There's plenty of it to go around. Let's share it. It somehow compounds, doesn't it?
Yes.
It grows in ways that don't make a whole lot of sense because
It
it's
goes like this. And
yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people. I have a lot of people in Pakistan, and they're Hindu, and they believe in karma and dharma. And I say, well, we sort of in the Western world have a way of looking at that in terms of like creating things that we want to create. You mentioned imagination.
Hmm.
Like for me, worrying is using your imagination to create things you don't want.
Hmm.
You can equally use that imagination to create things you do want. Because as soon as you give your brain some operating orders, it say, hey, I'm going to try to find that for you because it's important to you. And when you say to your
Hmm.
brain, I am amazed at how much beauty and joy you have brought me today. And thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow. and the brain
Mhm.
will just step up to the plate and find all these wonderful things for you to experience and enjoy.
Yeah, I'm really an advocate of gratitude exercises for that reason, because
Mhm.
it's brain training,
Mhm.
because the brain finds what it's looking for. So tell it what you want it to find, and
Yes.
what we want it to find is that things are good, and that's very, very true. But you have to, go looking for it. I like to say, if you feed the imagination fear, it comes up with worst case possibilities.
Mhm.
If you feed the imagination hope, it comes up with things, solutions, and possibilities that you never would have imagined. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
I think when God made us, He knew that we needed filters. Because if you could imagine taking in every single stimuli that's in our environment, we would just like have to lay down. We'd be like, oh, I can't take anymore. I can't take anymore. So he created our reticular activating system to block that. And by putting that filter there, and we're in control of a lot of those filters,
For
having that
sure.
ability uh, to look for the things that we find that serve us and create hope for ourselves, then they're there. We just can't see them.
Yeah,
Like we
that's right.
say, um, the scripture where it says, "We're actually heaven is here,"
Right.
but we
Right.
we don't have the capacity to see it yet.
Do you remember those? They were popular, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago. Those magic eye, and when you looked at them, it just looks like kind of static on a page. It's just sort of colors and shapes, and it doesn't make
Yes,
any sense.
yes, I
But
can see those. I
when you
can see
let
them.
your eyes relax, all of a sudden a 3D image appears. I think that's a lot like that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I totally with you on that one because everybody says, "Oh, hey." One of my girlfriends bought this beautiful new giant Tahoe white. She lives up in snow country, and she said, we investigated this because we've got the four boys, the four grown
Right.
boys, and they
Right.
wanted a big car so they could go on trips together." She said, "I investigated this for months looking for just the right car." And so we bring it home. They live in Montana. We bring it home, and we're going to go down to the grocery store later. And I go by five houses, and in those houses were three Tahoes, white. I had never seen those cars before. And it kind of shook me up because then I started thinking, what else am I missing?
Yes. I know there was a Brain Games episode
Mhm.
many years ago where they said, focus on the character, focus on the figure in the front. And then you watched it for a minute. And then they said, did you see the giant dancing gorilla behind the. It's like, there was a dancing gorilla. But if your brain isn't, look, if you're focused on one thing, especially in our relationships, if you're focused on how your partner's hurting you or what they're doing
Mhm.
wrong or what, you'll miss the love, the expressions of connection. You'll miss all those other wonderful things. So we have to teach our brains what we would like to see, and lo and behold, it's there.
Whoop, woof,
Boop, boop.
it appears. It appears. This has been delightful, Todd. I know you're just provide the most greatest service to your people that come join you, couples or maybe people who are not having a trouble finding their way through what I call the emotional everglades of life. Um,
Like that.
but thank you so much for being on this podcast today of Goodbody, Goodbrain. And when people see the podcast, below will be some show notes that will have your contact information and some other things about you. So they'll be able to contact you. And thank goodness for the world of Zoom. We can always be in contact no matter what part of the world we're in.
That's
And
right.
again, it's been my pleasure to have you as my guest,
I
and I
really
really
appreciate it.
appreciate you joining us. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me and for the work you do. And it's wonderful always to connect with someone else that is making a difference, sharing love and empathy, and making the world a better place. Thank you so much.
Thank you.